Throughout history, the cry for freedom has echoed from the darkest corners of oppression. While slavery has existed in many forms across time and cultures, so too has resistance. Today, we're counting down the 10 most powerful slave rebellions in history. Uprisings that shook empires, terrified rulers, and inspired generations. These were not just acts of defiance. They were battles for dignity, freedom, and justice. Number 1. The Haitian Revolution, 1791 to 1804. The Haitian Revolution was the first and only successful slave uprising that led to the creation of an independent nation. It began in 1791 in the French colony of Saint-Domingue, the wealthiest colony in the Americas, built on the backs of enslaved Africans who endured brutal conditions on sugar and coffee plantations. Inspired by the French Revolution's ideas of liberty and equality, the enslaved population launched a massive revolt. Under the leadership of Toussaint Louverture, a self-educated former slave, they organized a disciplined resistance. Louverture skillfully navigated alliances with Spain and France, outmaneuvering European powers who tried to regain control. When Napoleon sent a massive expedition to crush the revolt, the resistance continued, even after Louverture was captured and deported to France. His successor, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, led the final push for victory. In 1804, Haiti declared its independence, the first black-led republic and the first nation born from a slave revolt. The revolution was a turning point in world history. It shattered the myth of African inferiority, challenged European colonialism, and sent shockwaves through slaveholding societies across the Americas. Despite being punished with isolation and a crushing debt to France, Haiti stood as a symbol of black freedom and resilience. Number 2. The Spartacus Rebellion, 73 to 71 BCE. Spartacus, a Thracian gladiator enslaved by the Romans, became the unlikely leader of one of the largest and most dramatic slave uprisings in ancient history. In 73 BCE, he and about 70 fellow gladiators escaped from a training school in Capua. Armed with makeshift weapons, they defeated local Roman forces and fled to Mount Vesuvius. What began as a small breakout quickly turned into a massive rebellion. Enslaved people from across the Italian countryside joined the cause, swelling Spartacus' army to over 100,000 men. For 2 years, his forces outmaneuvered and defeated several Roman legions, raiding towns and freeing slaves as they marched across Italy. Spartacus' goal remains debated. Some believe he wanted to escape to freedom outside Italy, while others say he aimed to end slavery itself. Eventually, the Roman general Marcus Licinius Crassus cornered and defeated the rebels in 71 BCE. Spartacus was killed in battle, and over 6,000 of his followers were crucified along the Appian Way as a brutal warning. Though the revolt failed, it exposed deep flaws in Rome's slave-based economy and became a lasting symbol of courage, resistance, and the fight for freedom. Number 3. The Zanj Rebellion, 869 to 883 CE. In the 9th century, in the marshlands of southern Iraq, thousands of East African slaves, known as the Zanj, labored under harsh and inhumane conditions, draining salt from the soil on massive plantations. Most were brought from the Swahili coast and forced into grueling, often deadly, agricultural work by the Abbasid Caliphate. In 869 CE, a charismatic Persian man named Ali ibn Muhammad led a massive revolt, promising liberation and justice. The uprising rapidly grew in size and strength as more slaves and disaffected Arabs joined the cause. Over time, the Zanj forces became highly organized, building a capital city and forming a parallel government. At their peak, the rebels captured Basra, a major economic center, and threatened the heart of the Abbasid Empire. The rebellion lasted an astonishing 14 years, making it one of the longest and most sustained slave uprisings in history. Eventually, the Abbasid military crushed the rebellion in 883, but its impact was profound. The revolt exposed the vulnerabilities of the empire and forced reforms in how slave labor was managed. Today, The Zanj Rebellion stands as a testament to the will to resist oppression, even under impossible odds. Number 4. The Baptist War, 1831 to 1832. Also known as the Christmas Rebellion, the Baptist War was one of the largest slave uprisings in the British Caribbean. It was led by Samuel Sharp, a literate enslaved man and Baptist preacher who believed slavery was morally wrong and hoped that peaceful protest would bring change. In December 1831, during the Christmas holidays, one of the few times enslaved people were allowed rest, Sharp and other leaders organized a general strike across plantations in western Jamaica. What began as a peaceful protest quickly escalated into a full-blown rebellion as violence broke out between slaves and British militias. Over 60,000 enslaved people joined the uprising, setting fire to plantations and clashing with colonial forces. The rebellion lasted for about 10 days before it was brutally suppressed. Around 500 slaves were killed, including Samuel Sharp, who was hanged in May 1832. Before his execution, he famously said, "I would rather die upon yonder gallows than live in slavery." Despite its defeat, the rebellion shocked the British public and Parliament. The scale and intensity of the uprising highlighted the unsustainability of slavery in the colonies. Just 2 years later, in 1834, the British Empire passed the Slavery Abolition Act, marking the beginning of emancipation across the Caribbean. The Baptist War remains a powerful symbol of faith, resistance, and the cost of freedom. Number 5. Nat Turner's Rebellion, 1831. In August 1831, in Southampton County, Virginia, Nat Turner, an enslaved preacher and mystic, led one of the most infamous and impactful slave revolts in American history. Turner believed he was divinely chosen to lead his people to freedom and interpreted a solar eclipse as a sign to begin the uprising. On the night of August 21st, Turner and a small group of trusted followers began a violent rebellion, moving from plantation to plantation, killing white slaveholders and their families. Over 50 people were killed, the highest number of white casualties in any slave uprising in the U.S. Though the rebellion was suppressed within a few days, Turner evaded capture for nearly 2 months before being caught and executed. In the aftermath, white mobs and militias retaliated with brutal force, killing nearly 200 black people, many of whom had no connection to the revolt. The rebellion terrified the South. Virginia and other slave states responded with even harsher laws, banning black education, restricting assembly, and tightening patrols. But it also ignited fierce debates in the North, fueling the abolitionist movement and exposing the deepening moral and political divide over slavery in America. Nat Turner's legacy is complex, seen by some as a prophet, others as a radical, but he remains a powerful symbol of resistance, sacrifice, and the desperate fight for freedom in a nation built on slavery. Number 6. The German Coast Uprising, 1811. One of the largest and least remembered slave rebellions in U.S. history took place along the German coast of Louisiana in January 1811. Influenced by the ideals of the Haitian Revolution and the growing unrest among enslaved people, the uprising was led by Charles Dessalines, a mixed-race slave driver originally from Saint-Domingue. On the night of January 8th, Dessalines and his followers launched a revolt at a plantation just outside of New Orleans. Armed with axes, cane knives, and a few stolen firearms, they killed several slaveholders and began marching toward the city, hoping to spark a wider rebellion. Their numbers quickly grew to over 500 enslaved people, forming a makeshift army. As they advanced down the Mississippi River's east bank, they burned plantation homes and crops, aiming to disrupt the plantation economy. The rebellion was met with swift and violent retaliation. Local militias and U.S. federal troops intercepted the rebels after 2 days. In the brutal aftermath, dozens were killed in battle, and more than 100 were executed, some decapitated, their heads displayed on pikes along the river as a warning. Though the uprising was crushed, it exposed the deep fear slaveholders held and proved that even in the American South, large-scale organized resistance was possible. The German Coast Uprising has since been recognized as a key moment in the long struggle for Black liberation, a courageous but tragic stand against an inhuman system. Number 7. The Male Revolt, 1835. In the early morning hours of January 25, 1835, in the city of Salvador, Bahia, then the capital of colonial Brazil, a group of enslaved and freed African Muslims, known as males, launched a well-planned urban uprising during the holy month of Ramadan. Organized primarily by Hausa, Yoruba, and other West African Muslims, the rebellion was driven by both religious persecution and resistance to slavery. The males, many of whom were literate in Arabic and well-versed in Islamic teachings, communicated in secret and planned the revolt to coincide with a time of fasting and spiritual strength. Dressed in distinctive white clothing and armed with knives, swords, and a few firearms, the rebels aimed to overthrow the colonial authorities, liberate enslaved Africans, and establish a society where Islam could be freely practiced. Although the uprising was quickly suppressed by police and militias, it shook the foundations of Salvador's slave-owning elite. Over 600 people were arrested, and dozens were executed or exiled. Authorities responded with harsh crackdowns, including new laws banning Islamic dress, texts, and gatherings. Though the male revolt lasted less than a day, its significance was profound. It exposed the deep cultural cohesion and resistance among African Muslims in Brazil and highlighted how faith, identity, and solidarity could unite enslaved people in the face of oppression. It remains one of the most important examples of religiously motivated resistance in the America. Number 8. The Amistad Rebellion, 1839. Narrator. The Amistad Rebellion was a rare and powerful act of resistance, not on land, but at sea. In 1839, 53 Africans, mostly from the Min people of present-day Sierra Leone, were illegally kidnapped and sold into slavery. After enduring the brutal Middle Passage, they were transported from Havana, Cuba, aboard the Spanish schooner La Amistad. Led by a young man named Sengbi P., later known as Joseph Sink, the captives revolted just days into the voyage. Armed with sugarcane knives, they killed the captain and took control of the ship, ordering the remaining crew to sail them back to Africa. Instead, the crew secretly navigated northward, and after nearly 2 months at sea, the ship was intercepted by the U.S. Navy off the coast of Long Island. The Africans were imprisoned and put on trial for murder and mutiny. The case quickly gained national attention. Abolitionists, including former President John Quincy Adams, defended the rebels, arguing they had been illegally enslaved and had every right to fight for their freedom. In 1841, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in their favor, declaring that the captives had acted in self-defense. The surviving rebels were freed and eventually returned to Africa, a rare and symbolic victory for the abolitionist movement. The Amistad case challenged public opinion, exposed the illegal slave trade, and underscored the humanity and agency of enslaved Africans. It remains one of the most important legal and moral battles in the fight against slavery. Number 9. The Berbice Slave Uprising, 1763. In 1763, in the Dutch colony of Berbice, located in present-day Guyana, one of the earliest and most sustained slave revolts in the Americas erupted. Harsh conditions, disease, food shortages, and extreme brutality on the plantations pushed thousands of enslaved Africans to the breaking point. Led by Kofi, also spelled Kofi, an enslaved man believed to be of Akan origin from West Africa. The rebellion began on February 23rd at Plantation Magdalennenburg. What started as a local uprising quickly spread across the colony. As Dutch troops fled, the rebels gained control of large portions of Berbice, holding territory for more than a year. Kofi emerged as a commander and established a form of governance, declaring himself governor of Berbice. He even attempted to negotiate peace with Dutch authorities, offering to divide the colony. A remarkable demonstration of political vision and leadership. However, internal divisions among the rebels, combined with the arrival of reinforcements from the Dutch Republic, eventually led to the rebellion's collapse in 1764. Cuffy reportedly took his own life rather than surrender. Many of his followers were executed in brutal fashion, but his legacy endured. Today, Cuffy is celebrated as a national hero in Guyana, a symbol of resistance, unity, and the enduring fight for dignity and freedom. His statue stands prominently in the capital, Georgetown, reminding the nation of its roots in struggle and resilience. Number 10. The Revolt of the Mamluks, 9th to 13th centuries. The story of the Mamluks is one of the most extraordinary in world history. Not just a revolt, but a rise to power. The Mamluks were enslaved boys, mostly of Turkic and Caucasian origin, brought to the Islamic world and trained as elite soldiers for the Abbasid caliphs, Ayyubid sultans, and other rulers across the Middle East and North Africa. Over time, they became a powerful military caste, known for their discipline, loyalty, and skill in battle. But in 13th century Egypt, they did something almost unheard of. They overthrew their masters. In 1250, following the assassination of the last Ayyubid Sultan, the Mamluks seized power and established their own regime, the Mamluk Sultanate. Under leaders like Sultan Baybars, the Mamluks not only consolidated control over Egypt and Syria, but defeated the Mongols at the Battle of Ain Jalut, 1260, a major turning point that stopped Mongol expansion into the Muslim world. They also expelled the remaining Crusaders from the Levant and became defenders of the Islamic world. The Mamluk Sultanate ruled for over 250 years, building architectural wonders, promoting trade and scholarship, and leaving a lasting cultural legacy. Though originally enslaved, the Mamluks redefined the meaning of power, showing that even those born into bondage could reshape empires and dominate history. Their rise was not just a rebellion. It was a revolution in the structure of Islamic rule. These rebellions were more than uprisings. They were calls for humanity in the face of inhumanity. Though many were crushed, their courage and determination lit sparks that would ignite abolition movements across the globe. History remembers the chains, but it also remembers those who broke them. If you found this journey powerful, don't forget to like, share, and keep learning. Because remembering the fight for freedom is part of preserving it.